Welcome to another Star Citizen Addicts Anonymous. I'm Nikki Batgirl D'Angelo, your host. It was a little bit busy week. I didn't give up on Star Citizen. I didn't move away from it. In fact, I appeared on InfoRunners. But what I wanted to get back to this week was to update my studio. You see, when COVID happened, my studio turned into a workplace because I had to work from home. And it kind of stayed in that limbo state with a lot of my equipment being moved around and moved out. And with the building out of the studio just halting altogether. This week, I spent a little bit of time putting it back together, moving things back in line, putting my second monitor back next to my streaming machine, which is on the right, putting up shelves and getting all my Lego fixtures and things done. And I'm not even quite there yet, but it's workable now and it should be fun. And we should see a little bit more of this studio as I start to build out Star Citizen Addicts Anonymous again. And hopefully that light in the corner over there disappears and turns into something nicer. Rejoining the Star Citizen community has been easy, but finding content to do weekly videos is not really as easy as you might think. A lot of the content that's around today are things I've done in the past, comparing ships, talking about which one was worth buying, and also speculating about things coming out. What I found in the past, speculation, it's almost always wrong. You know, you come and you sit down and you take notes on a brand new ship, write down your thoughts, and decide, all right, how am I going to discuss the ship? Is it worth it or is it not worth it? You know, when I first saw ships like the Nomad, and I know that this is controversial because some people hate it, some people love it, I didn't like it, but I like it a lot more after using it than I did when I looked at it on paper. I don't know if it's the 24 SCU of cargo space. I don't know if it's the fact it could hold a rock. But I mean, it has its liabilities, but it's not a don't buy. It's a buy it if you like it. These types of videos where you're telling people what to buy and what not to buy always fail to mention one thing. The current version of Star Citizen is not Star Citizen. It's an alpha. And that makes a very key distinction between that beta and early release. What it means is that not all the systems and features are in place. So because of that, missions, ship prices, and professions are not going to give the same benefits, the same rewards when the game comes out as they are now. So when we base our opinions on whether a ship is good enough to buy or not on today's pricing, on today's ease of getting UEC, it becomes a little bit of a moot point because this version of Star Citizen is going to have much higher rewards for things like mining, for things like cargo running, for missions than when the game comes out. Yes, I know that you say, all right, but we can do all these things now and this is when we're going to be using the ships. But what I'm saying is we just have to take it a little bit lighter when we tell people, don't buy that ship, just buy it in game, because if somebody misses the opportunity to get a war bond on a ship and have it now, something that they want, and later it goes up a few million credits in UEC to buy it in game, that's going to be a problem. So when I speculate and give my opinion on whether a ship is worth it or not, I'm always going to be doing it from the understanding that it's going to be different in the future. So 2 brand new flyable ships are already guaranteed, that being the Vulture and of course the Corsair, which we will have very shortly. The Vulture will have to wait until 3.18. With IAE now being part of 3.17.4, we now have a couple of more ships that are going to be flyable in the current version of Star Citizen. That being the C8-R rescue version of the Pisces and the Drake Cutter. This episode is being filmed after my appearance on InfoRunners, so some of you might have already saw us speak of this, but I really wasn't able to get out my ideas because I was just having too much fun on the show. We had been speaking for almost an hour before we started filming. Execute and Allegred are amazing people, and Paul from Astropub, he's aces. Loved being on that show, but found I needed to spend a little bit more time on this subject. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into the speculation on the 2 ships. And I'm going to start with the C8-R. The C8-R being a rescue version of the Pisces is something that makes sense. I myself have been using the Pisces as a medical ship for a little bit. It doesn't have a bed, but I do carry that medical gun, and I have quite a number of consumables that could help people get up and running again. I've run quite a number of the emergency beacons where you run out and save someone that's been incapacitated, and I've done it because it's not just the 15K that you get, but a lot of those people you save give you tips, and I think that's wonderful. And thank you so much if you are one of those people. When I envision the C8R, I still see a jump seat on the left, I see the bed on the right, and I see some other medical equipment. This is going to be your ambulance, and an ambulance stabilizes a patient and brings them to a hospital. Now let's talk about what we know about medical gameplay. Right now we have handheld devices, and we have two ships, one that's in game and one that's coming in the future. And those are the Cutlass Red and the Apollo. Cutlass Red has a lower tier bed. It's kind of like the C8R, but the Apollo is going to be a medical evac. It's going to be having a higher end bed. So it would be more than just stabilizing a patient. It will be curing some of those harder to cure wounds. And for those harder to cure wounds, you have to go to a hospital or bring the hospital to you. And that would be in ships like the Endeavour. But the Endeavour is not the only hospital ship. We have to go back to a time when the Carrack was released for sale. And the Carrack was released at a time when there were different ships that were being made with modules. Back then, the Vanguard was supposed to have modules that would change it between all the different variants. There were supposed to be modules for the Retaliator and also for the Carrack. The Carrack right now has cargo modules, but there are 3 other modules that you could add to them. It could be a science module, habitation module, or even a medical module. This is where we're going to break for just 1 second. We're going to talk about the way that CIG is doing professions. Each profession is not just single-tiered, it's multi-tiered. When you look at cargo, after the cargo refactor, there's going to be loading and unloading your ship. And if you read way back to the beginning of when the Hull A was released, that ship's main purpose was to unload ships like the Hull E, Hull D, and move their cargo to stations or down to the planet. Mining is no different. After mining your Quantanium or other resources, you have to have it refined. And now we have a refinery ship coming to the game in the form of the Expanse. And this 2-tier approach is also coming to salvage. But let's stick to medical, and let's stick to something that we know. 3.18 leaks show that the cargo pods on the underside of the Carrack can be blown off. Pyro's release next year brings along some hurdles. One of those hurdles comes in the form of lack of services. It's a very big star system with many planets, but with many of them being uninhabited, and with derelict space stations being used to put services in, you're not going to find the same medical care in Pyro that you do in Stanton. So you may need to bring your own medical care with you in the form of a Carrack with a medical bay. And this makes sense to me because we're going to be fighting pirates, maybe having huge dynamic events there and having multiple people die at once. The current way that things are done is if everybody just binds to their Carrack, as people die, they all just come back in that one bed. I see CIG making it a little bit more difficult in the future. As we move away from the boom you're dead to the boom you're incapacitated mechanic, the need to rescue incapacitated crewmates or orgmates from disabled ships or battlefield is going to become more common. So the C8R makes a lot of sense when you consider Pyro coming out next year and its lack of services and needing that hospital ship, which I believe is going to be the Carrack with medical pods. I'm not predicting that the Carrack is suddenly going to have medical pods available to it now, but I believe that by the time Pyro comes out, those will be released. You know what else makes sense? My next prediction. When CIG pulled Salvage from the roadmap a couple of years ago, they said they didn't want to release it until the game loop was fully fleshed out. That means more than just stripping the hull. That's all they've shown us so far. So we have a ship, the Vulture, that can strip the hull. But Salvage has a couple more components to it. There's cutting up the frame of the ship, and then there's securing the modules and weapons and capacitors, CPU, all those things that are inside. And I think that's exactly what the Cutter is going to do. That lets us envision this. The Vulture's done stripping a section of hull. The Cutter comes in, cuts apart the frame, and then exposes the components which leads to people leaving the cutter in maneuvering units to remove the components and weapon systems from the derelict and put them back aboard the cutter. When the cutter's filled up, it flies over to a reclaimer where those parts are moved either into the cargo bay for the components or sent into the shredder inside of the reclaimer to be turned into scrap. Let us remember, it's not the scrap that's going to make the most money here. It's going to be getting those components and reselling them. I believe the cutter was a lot easier to explain because it's coming out as a full gameplay loop. One where we strip the hull and one where we collect the components and the other pieces of the derelict, thus making it disappear. Although truly speculative, I'm excited about this ship because it means that CIG is actually bringing us more of a gameplay loop when they release different professions. And I'm also excited about the C8-R because it means beginning to flesh out that gameplay loop for medical. That's about all I have today. I mean, I could talk about the size of the ship and other things, but honestly, the perspective that you have in the photo just doesn't give us an idea of how big this ship is going to be. My guess would probably be a little bit bigger than a Herald, a little bit smaller than a Cutlass, and a lot more volume inside to put things. Well, that's all I have for you today. If you do like this episode, please click the thumbs up button below. And if you do subscribe or have subscribed, remember to click that bell-shaped icon to get notified of all my future videos. If you do want to help out my channel some more, you could always go to patreon.com/Batgirl and become one of my patrons to help support all my future productions of Star Citizen content. And with that said, you all be safe out there, and I will talk to you soon. By the way, Jax is not dead.